On today's show, it is Friday. There's some news on the Atlanta Hawks and some mailbag questions from you, the listener and viewer of this podcast, and all of that is coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1802 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Friday here in mid to late September. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. And now through September 22nd, all customers at FanDuel can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. I also want to encourage you at the top of the podcast, as I always do, to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out anywhere you find your podcasts. That includes YouTube, of course. If you're watching this podcast, please like the episode on the video side. Also on the audio side, we're on Apple, we're on Spotify, we're on Amazon Music, we're on Overcast. Again, anywhere you find your podcast. And it's been very busy on the show this week. This is our 5th episode this week already, as we're wrapping up to training camp. In fact, Media Day is less than 10 days away as I'm recording this podcast. It is next Monday. So we're getting very, very close to arrival of the season in full force. I've been joined 3 times this week by Glenn Willis of ATL and 29 fame. Glenn came on to talk about Larry Nance on Monday, and then Dyson Daniels in 2-part fashion on Wednesday and Thursday. In between that, I had Anthony Irwin on the podcast talking about the Los Angeles Lakers and that pretty intriguing draft pick that the Hawks had control over this season. But today's show is just me, and we'll be talking about the latest news around the Hawks, as well as some mailbag questions at the end of the podcast. So without any further delay, let's dive in now to what is on the agenda today. And there was a transaction to discuss in the last couple of days. Not a high-level one, but one that is interesting nonetheless for the sickos. Kevon Harris agreed to an Exhibit 10 contract with the Hawks, as first reported by Mike Scotto, good friend of the podcast, and I confirmed that news since then. The Hawks have not announced that just yet, as they still have not announced Joey Hauser in similar fashion. That'll be coming at some point soon. But Harris is a 27-year-old guard, listed at 6'5", actually grew up, is from the Atlanta area, went to high school in the Atlanta area, was a 4-year college player at Stephen F. Austin, a pretty decent basketball school in recent years. He went undrafted in 2020, which for Hawks fans is the same draft that Okongwu was the 6th pick in. So, a handful of years ago now, but still played in the G League and overseas the first couple of years of his career at the professional level, then signed a 2-way contract with the Magic and was there the last 2 years in Orlando and Osceola, back and forth, their G League team. He played in 36 NBA games last year and 47 G League games last year. So very, very busy. In the last 2 years across the board there. Shot it well from three-point range anywhere he's been. So 38% from 3 in the G League, 37% from 3 in the NBA so far in a tiny sample size, almost 40% in college before that. So the shooting is certainly an appeal for Kevon Harris. I actually asked the folks that cover the Atlanta Magic in the last day or two, and they spoke highly of Harris, talked about how he actually plays bigger than his listed size of 6'5", noted the shooting, of course, thought he would be actually a real candidate at some point to be on a full roster spot in Orlando, but that didn't end up not happening. But still, someone that is well-liked and respected. So from all I can gather here, I would say this is a very good Exhibit 10 contract get for the Hawks, and a guy that could be very useful in the G League, if nothing else. He is 27, so not like a huge developmental prospect, but someone if you had to plug in, you could probably do so without too much disaster. From the team side, this takes the Hawks from actually up to 20 players under contract plus Nikola Jurisic. So 15 guys on the full roster. I won't name them all now, but that's the maximum you can have. That has not changed. 3 guys on 2 ways. That is, of course, Seth Lundy and Dom Barlow, in addition to Keaton Wallace. And then you have Kevon Harris and Joey Hauser on Exhibit 10 training camp deals. As a reminder of what an Exhibit 10 is, it's a 1-year deal at the minimum, basically, but it's non-guaranteed. The player gets a little bit of money to come and sign this contract and be able to have their G League rights retained if the player is waived. I discussed this a few weeks ago when the Hawks actually came to that Exhibit 10 agreement with Joey Hauser that I reported on. The vast majority of the time, Exhibit 10s get cut at the end of camp or near the end of camp and then filtered down to the G League. So that should be what you expect to happen with Kevon Harris. That's the most likely scenario by far, but that is not a lock. I think Harris is fairly interesting. Exhibit 10s can be converted to 2-way contracts. Again, the Hawks have a full roster, including a full 2-way allotment, but if something were to happen there, either a trade or somebody gets cut or whatever, they just like Harris more than somebody else, they can kind of waive a guy. That's possible. But anyway, the broad takeaway on the roster standpoint is the Hawks are still full. They're actually at the absolute max now they can actually have under contract, even with Exhibit 10s. Jurisic is looming out there. I talked about that a few weeks ago on the podcast. Still no solution there. So probably going to learn about that at Media Day a little bit more, see what the Hawks and Landry Fields have to say about their second-round pick from this year. But Kevon Harris is a guy that's intriguing. And again, in my mind, at the very minimum, a good bet on Exhibit 10. That's kind of all you're asking for what they invested in him. Elsewhere on the news front, I know this earlier in the offseason, but Ryan Schmidt, who has been garnering rave reviews as the head coach in College Park for the G League team, is now a full-time Hawks assistant after doing a fantastic job. I speculate on this. I'm not reporting this, but generally the consensus was if the Hawks didn't do something else with Ryan Schmidt, he was going to get poached somewhere else. He has a really high reputation after what he did last year, or really the last couple of years in College Park. So now he is on the bench under Snyder. That left an opening, and Steve Cly, who's actually an assistant under Quinn last year with the Big League Club, is now going to be going to College Park. So it's kind of a swap. Technically, Cly is still a Hawks assistant. The Hawks have, because they're so close together with College Park, they can actually have some pretty decent overlap, and they've pretty much invested heavily, I would say, in the G League. But Cly worked for Quinn in Utah. There's that organizational synergy that you want there, and Quinn and Landry both have real G League investments. Quinn coached in the G League. Landry really values it, et cetera, and they care about investing in it. I think Landry was also the GM of Austin Spurs, et cetera. So they care about the G League, and last year it actually proved really to be very useful. The most infamous of that is Vit Krejci turning his career around. Like he was on the scrap heap. He was with the Iowa Wolves, unaffiliated in the G League. The Hawks brought him in on the two-way. He developed in a big-time way. I thought they did a good job with Kobe Buffkin last year, Mo Gay in a limited sample size. So certainly every reason to believe that's going to keep going with the Hawks, but now it's going to be Steve Cly in College Park and Ryan Schmidt in Atlanta. Okay. One more newsy item. This is not exactly it's mailbag question, but it's also kind of newsy. So we'll go there next. It comes from Kane, who says, what do you think about the report that AJ Griffin is considering retirement? So it's been more than a week now since this came out, and there has not been any follow-up that I have seen on the reporting side that I am aware of anyway. So just noting this, it could change. But if you missed it, Sean Sarania and Kelly Iko, who covers the Rockets for The Athletic, reported that AJ is, quote, seriously considering stepping away from basketball, end quote, and that both sides are, quote, preparing for his departure from the game. Obviously, it's pretty shocking when a 21-year-old who was drafted in the first round 2 years ago is reported to be retiring or maybe thinking about it at least. So I got lots of texts and calls about this. People around the league asking my opinion as someone who covered him for 2 years in Atlanta. The way that I put this is that I am not nearly as surprised about this as it might be normally for other people who have not been around the Hawks closely the last couple of years. I'll be the first to say this. I've not heard from AJ directly, and I won't claim to know anything about this, like expertise-wise, about his mental state, all those things. I don't know. But going back to his personal absence last year, which kind of came out of the blue, he was gone for a while, etc. I heard plenty of buzz that he just wasn't like that into basketball anymore, basically. Like it wasn't a priority for him in the way that it kind of has to be. Like if you're an NBA player, you have to prioritize basketball. It's just the way it is. I'm not sure that was all that was going on with AJ last year. In fact, I'm probably sure it wasn't. But at the very least, it seems like basketball was not the top priority for AJ at that point, and maybe still now. And there was a lot going on with him. So I'm not going to dive into this too much more because I just don't know specifics, and it wouldn't be responsible to speculate beyond this on this podcast. Plus, he's not on the Hawks anymore, so it's not a situation that I'm going to be covering day to day. But I'll finish this by just saying, like, I'm not terribly surprised. But more importantly, I really hope that AJ does what he wants to do. And if that's not basketball, it's not basketball. So it might be, I don't know, but I wish him the best if he does step back from basketball and retire. I wish him the best on that. I wish him the best if he keeps playing. No matter what, he should just do what he wants to do. And I know there's a lot of money involved in those things, but if he doesn't want to play basketball anymore, he shouldn't play basketball anymore. And we'll leave it right there. All right, we'll have more coming up in a second on your mailbag questions on today's podcast. But first, a word from our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Many times before, you've heard me talk about FanDuel Sportsbook, and FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, they have something a little bit different for you, and that is now through September 22nd, which is coming up pretty soon. All FanDuel customers can bet $5. You get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game in the NFL. All you need is a Google account and a credit card payment, and you will actually be able to cancel anytime if you want to. When you get there to FanDuel Sportsbook as well, you will know that the app is really easy to use. They have also that you're looking for across the sports betting space. They have over-unders, they have point spreads, they have live betting, they have money lines, player props, future bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. The FanDuel app is safe, it's secure. They cover the entire range of sports as well. That includes the NBA, which is our focus on this podcast, but WNBA, NFL is now in total full swing. College football is the same. Baseball, hockey, golf, tennis, soccer, auto racing, boxing, MMA, and so many more sports are out there for you at FanDuel Sportsbook. And now is an awesome time to sign up with the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook and just visit FanDuel.com to get started. One more time, visit FanDuel.com and check out America's #1 sportsbook. All right, let us dive into the mailbag. And the first question comes from Tanner, who says, was there any thoughts to talking trades with Anthony Irwin when he came on the Locked On Hawks podcast? I heard this week from ESPN that Hunter could be a Lakers target, and there is always the Trae buzz from LA. So let me get in front of this now, and I appreciate the question from Tanner, but the Hunter-Lakers connection was not really a rumor or reporting or anything close to that. It came from the Hoop Collective podcast. Tim McMahon, who is on that podcast with Brian Windhorst and Tim Bontemps, and McMahon, I listened to it. He properly couched it as a hypothetical. It was not reporting. They went out of their way to say that. It was not interest. It was not talks, etc. He did say, and I would second this, that the Hawks have been trying to offload Hunter for a while. That's not a huge surprise. Like, that's not a huge secret either. Like, the contract is underwater, in my opinion. It's not like the worst contract in the league or anything like that. But if you gave the Hawks true serum and said, do you want to pay DeAndre Hunter this deal over the next 3 years, they would probably say no. And I think the league knows that and agrees with it. So that's kind of why he's not been traded. Anyway, all things equal, they would have liked to trade him this summer if they could have, and there were no buyers. So I did consider talking trade stuff with Anthony overall because the Hawks and the Lakers have been tied together quite a few times in rumors the last few years. We did briefly mention on that podcast, which you should definitely listen to if you haven't already, the DeJounte Murray talks from last year, and it got pretty close with the Lakers and the Hawks a few times on DeJounte. But we also had a kind of defined period of time to record that podcast. I want to touch on the stuff with the Lakers pick first and foremost and their roster. That's why we didn't go deeper into potential trade stuff. We'll say that for later. Could the Hawks trade Hunter to the Lakers? Yes, they could. He would help the Lakers. I think he's better than a lot of what they have with their depth. At the same time, I'd be surprised if he was like a priority for the Lakers because of the contract and all that stuff. And there's also this interesting situation right now where the Hawks probably don't want to help the Lakers because the Lakers have owed their pick to Atlanta. So it'd have to be a very favorable deal for the Hawks to consider dealing with the Lakers right now in season. It's not a scenario that I envision also, but I got a couple questions about this too. Like, who else could happen if the Hawks had like a really bad start to the season and they wanted to like sell a little bit more? Maybe the Lakers would call on Bogey, but like, same principle applies. Why would the Hawks want to trade Bogey to the Lakers? All things equal. He would help them a lot. Bogey would be their third best player by a wide margin, in my opinion. I think he's considerably better than Austin Reeves. But why would the Hawks do that? So, before I forget this, a few folks asked me to weigh in on the Lakers and my own thoughts because I mostly deferred to Anthony on that show on purpose. It was about the Lakers. He covers the Lakers. It was intentional. I wanted the Lakers side of things. For one, I will say this for now. I am lower on the Lakers than Anthony is. I think their downside is lower than he does. I think their upside is lower than he does, for example. But I think generally speaking, that's a playoff level team if LeBron and AD stay healthy. But I think that's a huge if that you cannot just overall discount. And by the way, when I say playoff team, I mean like play-in team for the Lakers, not necessarily a 50-win team. So also I'm planning to do my usual over-under podcast with Robbie Cowan, a good friend of the podcast, in the next few weeks. That'll include the Lakers for one segment of that podcast. And then one more time, I will probably weigh in on the Lakers and Kings in kind of final prediction fashion before the season because those are huge subplots to this Hawks year. But that's why I didn't talk about that ton on that podcast. And lastly, on this question on the Trae thing, I will avoid that for now. I don't think there's anything there with the Lakers at the moment. He will always be photoshopped into Lakers jerseys from now until the end of time, given that the Lakers are always star hunting and he has a house there. He lives there part of the time, et cetera, et cetera. But not going to happen anytime soon, I don't think. And again, one more time, why would the Hawks trade with the Lakers right now to help them? Even all things equal. And they're not going to trade Trae right now anyway, but regardless. Speaking of Trae, question comes from Neil, who says, did you see that Trae said he would be the GOAT if he was 6'8"? The group chat has been piling on all day, making fun of him saying that. So he did say this. I will give the quote in a second. It was not on his own podcast. It was on another show. I can't remember the name right now. My apologies, but I will give the longer quote for the context. Here's what Trae had to say about this topic. Quote, "If I was 6'8", I feel like I would be the best player to ever play this game just because of my mentality and the smartness I have on this game. I feel like there's a lot I can bring, but there are a lot of deficiencies because I'm 6'1", 6'2". It's tough, and I'm playing in a big man's game. You know what I'm saying? But I make it work." End quote. So the two main things that are true here. Number one is more positive, right? Trae doing what he does at his size is impressive, and it shouldn't be overlooked. He's really small in an NBA context. I've been in a lot of NBA locker rooms. I look Trae in the eye. I'm about 6'1". Trae's about 6'1". Obviously, he's in a lot better shape than I am, but we're, generally speaking, about the same height. And if I was in an NBA locker room or on an NBA court, I would look very small. He's very small. I think he's the best passer in the league of anyone who is the size of a small guard. You can certainly argue for guys like Jokic or Luka or whoever that are big. It's easier to pass when you're big. But he's, I think, the best passer in the league from an actual guard-sized player, which is impressive to do. And look, there's a certain chip on the shoulder for Trae, and he's always had that dating back to college and high school because he's always been dismissed by some for his size. So it's even more understandable he thinks this way. He probably wants to be bigger. It is what it is. Number two, though, is that I think he's wrong. I don't think he'd be the best player ever if he was 6'8". But, of course, this is an impossible question because you can't just assume you're going to take all of the skill package that Trae has at 6'1" and suddenly be 6'8" and keep it all. That's, like, not realistic. It's just the way that the body works. But I can see where he's coming from, though, because a lot of his defensive deficiencies would go away if he was 6'8". I'm not saying he'd be the best defender in the world because he wouldn't be. But his main problem defensively is that he's small. There are other problems, too. But, like, if he was 6'4", he would not be the kind of defender that people think that he is. Number one, he isn't as basketball that people think that he is now. I think he is better than people think he is now because there's this caricature of Trae's defense like he's not even on the court. He's improved there. He's still bad. All that said. Now, it would be fascinating to see if you could stretch him out to 6'8" without losing any of his skill set on offense. It's hard to envision that. But if he can handle the ball like the way he does now and have all the craft that he does and foul drawing, all that stuff, he'd be very, very good. He's already very good now, but he'd be even better, obviously. So it's silly, it's hypothetical, and Trae is a very confident person. So I'm not surprised that he thinks this, but I don't think it's particularly true. It is what it is, but it's September. I don't think anyone would have cared about this in April. By the way, I don't think anybody that's like not a super online person even knew about this. Like people sent it to me. It was on Hoops Hype, I think, at one point in time, but like not a huge story, nor should it have been. It's an offhand comment. It's not crazy, and we'll leave it there. All right, one more question on the podcast that comes from Nelson, who says, Tyler Jones made a great point last season that our 5 best players couldn't share the court together. Do you think post-DeJounte that our best 5 can, in fact, share the court? So thanks for the question, Nelson. And Tyler is a friend of the podcast. If you don't know this podcast well, he's a frequent guest on the show, probably every month or more. And he makes a good points a lot of time, but he was right about this. And the Hawks actively did not want to play the 3-man lineup of Trae, DeJounte, and Bogey. Now, they did it sometimes out of necessity or out of when they were down big or whatever. But they were clearly 3 of the top 5 players. You could argue they were even the best 3, but certainly 3 of the top 4 with Jalen. And they didn't play those guys together very often for obvious reasons. They were really small, et cetera, et cetera. So the short answer is that this year, yes, the Hawks can actually play their best 5 a lot easier than last year. Trae, Bogey, and Jalen are pretty clearly, for me, the 3 best players on the team at this moment in time. And they easily fit together. Like you got a point guard, you got a wing, and you got a big forward in Jalen. As a sidebar, by the way, no matter what I say or what numbers I give and context that I provide or whatever, there's always somebody somewhere on YouTube or in Twitter or whatever that wants to tell me that Trae and Bogey can't play together because of the defense. And I promise you're wrong. I get it. I've done it many times on the show before, but it does work. It has always worked. The numbers tell you that it works. It's always worked. Defensively, it's not good. I understand. Like those 2 in the backcourt is not what you want to see defensively. But the offense is absurd when they play together. And there is a multi-year, 3-4 year history of the Hawks being good when Trae and Bogey play together. So I get it, but I promise you, you're wrong. If you think the Hawks can't play Trae and Bogey together, you're wrong. It's just what it is. All right. Anyway, the best 3 players, Trae, Bogey, Jalen. There's a debate on who 4 and 5 are right now. but I guess there's a chance that Okongwu and Capella are 4 and 5. I wouldn't say that as far as like on the hierarchy. So what I would say is any combination other than that one maybe would work. And even then, you probably could play those guys together as long as you had Trae and Bogey on the court. But if I had to say who the 5 best players are right now in a vacuum on September 20th, I would say Trae, Bogey, Jalen, of course. Then I would say a center, and then Dyson Daniels would be my best guess as the best 5. Now, that lineup is fairly small on the perimeter. I get that, but Dyson's defense is that good. It allows it to work. And while I understand no Hawks fans are doing this because they're not very high on DeAndre Hunter right now, I think people in the league would probably have maybe Hunter as the 5th best player on the team. It is what it is. I'm not saying that I do, but I understand that viewpoint on some level, given that Dyson is a little bit less proven. I like Dyson more than DeAndre Hunter pretty clearly, but he's just played a lot less, et cetera, et cetera. And it goes to the point that I know Glenn and I have been making on player capsules a lot this summer, but the roster just fits together a lot better than it did before. And like you could argue Okongwu versus Capella until the day is over. I promise you can do that. I think Capella's been better to this point. I think Okongwu, if you just started their careers from now on, would be better because he's just a lot younger. It is what it is. But it's not just like Trae and DeJounte being separated. Now that's a big part of it too. But now they have a lot more like defense on the perimeter, for example. Dyson's the headliner of that. But you have Kobe, who I think is an upgrade on what DeJounte gave you defensively, if you have to do that. You got Krejci, who last year, knock on wood, hopefully it continues, was pretty good defensively when he arrived for the final time. I think Vite as a big like key to the season is a little bit overstated sometimes, but backup wings, if his shooting holds up, be very helpful. Larry Nance is a massive upgrade on Bruno Fernando or whoever you want to say that is on that kind of combo big slot from last year. You know, even Dom Barlow would help you more than some other guys. I think David Roddy is better than like Wes Matthews from last year. Like it's minor things, a lot of it, but like the big things are Dyson in particular defensively, and the pieces do fit better together. Now, when Trae sits, big question, as we talked about a lot on the podcast. And spoiler alert, we'll have a Trae Young player capsule in the near future. We'll talk about that a little bit on that podcast too, and like what he does, all that stuff. But to answer the question, on the whole, they do have a much easier time right now playing their best players. Like there are no 3-man groups of their top 3 or 4 players that don't work in the way that Trae, DeJounte, and Bogey kind of didn't work on paper. And as Tyler, I will quote Tyler because the question quoted Tyler Jones. He's made this point a lot. He's more aggressive on it than I am, but like there were a lot of nights where I would have probably preferred Bogey to close games instead of DeJounte. And the Hawks just were never going to do that. They were never going to have DeJounte for political. And look, he's a really good player, but there were nights where it just didn't work, the two of them. And like Bogey is really good. So it's not a shot at DeJounte, but they just weren't going to do that. So there were nights when Bogey was on the bench at the end of games, which shouldn't happen. Like Bogey's really good. He should be closing every game, etc. All right, I'll be done on that rant right now. That's all I have on today's podcast. A little bit shorter than usual, but it is Friday and a full week of podcasts. So one more plug at the end of the show. We had Glenn's been on 3 times this week. We had Larry Nance, and then we had a 2-parter on Dyson Daniels, and then plus the Anthony Irwin podcast that I've referenced multiple times on this show. This is episode 5 this week. We'll have much more coming up. Again, Media Day is about 10 days away at this stage. We'll have a full week of shows next week as well in between. I will be on the scene at Media Day, giving you all of the ins and outs and my interpretations of what is said on that day. And then training camp starts at UGA right after that. Full steam ahead to the preseason, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, we're less than, 3 weeks away now from an actual preseason game taking place. So you want to lock in now. You already should be locked in all summer long. But if you're coming back to the Hawks, as I understand people definitely do this time of year, go ahead and subscribe to this podcast on Apple, on Spotify, on Amazon Music, on Overcast. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, first of all, thanks for being here. Second of all, please like this episode. And third of all, please subscribe, hit the bell, be notified when the show's going live. And for everybody listening to the podcast, please tell your friends. I'll be doing a little bit of a drive to kind of up subscriptions, hopefully between now and opening night. And it starts now. So please go ahead and tell your friends about the podcast. Subscribe to the show, post on social media, post on Reddit, whatever you want to do to spread the word. I very much appreciate it. Thanks for listening, everybody. Please follow the show on Twitter as well, /X at Locked On Hawks. I am on there at BT Rowland. I also have some non-podcast work at patreon.com/BT Rowland. I'll sign up for now. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you all next time.